Hey there, fellow plant lovers. Welcome back to Botanic Haven, your go-to channel for everything about gardening, plant care, and creating those beautiful green spaces, both indoors and out. Today, I want to have a heart-to-heart with you about something that's been on my mind as we're right in the thick of February. Those sneaky planting mistakes that might seem harmless now, but end up haunting your plants for the entire growing season. I've made plenty of these errors myself over the years, and I've watched friends and neighbors make them too. So trust me when I say that what you do this month really matters. February can be tricky because it sits right on that edge between winter and spring, and it's so tempting to get ahead of ourselves. But patience and smart planning now will save you months of frustration later. Let me start with one of the biggest mistakes I see people make in February. Starting seeds way too early indoors. I get it, I really do. When you're staring out at grey skies and maybe some lingering snow, the idea of filling your windowsill with little green seedlings sounds absolutely magical. Last year, my neighbour Oliver got so excited that he started his tomatoes in early February, thinking he'd get a jump on the season. The problem? By the time it was actually safe to transplant them outside in late May, those tomato plants were leggy, root-bound, and stressed out beyond belief. They never really recovered that vigour, and his harvest was disappointingly small. The thing is, most vegetables and flowers only need 6 to 8 weeks of indoor growing time before they're ready to go outside. If you start them too early, they outgrow their containers, get stretched out reaching for light, and become weakened before they even see the garden. Check your last frost date for your area, count backward, and resist that urge to start too soon. Your plants will thank you with stronger stems, better root systems, and ultimately more productive growth. Another mistake that follows plants all season is ignoring soil temperature when you're eager to direct sow seeds outdoors. I learned this lesson the hard way with peas one year. February was unusually warm where I live, and I thought I was being clever by getting my pea seeds in the ground super early. But here's the thing, soil temperature matters way more than air temperature for seed germination. Even if it feels spring-like during the day, if your soil is still cold and waterlogged from winter, those seeds are just going to sit there rotting instead of sprouting. Some seeds, like peas and spinach, can handle cool soil, but they still need it to be at least 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Other seeds, like beans or squash, need soil that's at least 60 degrees, sometimes warmer. When seeds struggle to germinate because the soil is too cold, they either don't come up at all, or they emerge weak and stunted, making them vulnerable to diseases and pests for the rest of the season. Invest in a simple soil thermometer. They're cheap and worth their weight in gold. Stick it a few inches into the soil in the morning to get an accurate reading, and don't rush things just because you're excited. If this guide has helped you, write 1 in the comments. And if not, write 0. This way, I'll know which tips are most useful for your garden. Now, let's talk about something that might surprise you. Overwatering seedlings and young plants in February. This one catches a lot of people because we tend to think more water equals more growth, especially when we're babying those precious little sprouts. But in February, when light levels are still relatively low and temperatures can be inconsistent, plants simply don't need as much water as they will in the heat of summer. My friend Daisy nearly killed an entire tray of pepper seedlings because she was watering them every single day, trying to be attentive. The soil stayed constantly soggy, the roots couldn't breathe, and fungal diseases like damping off started taking out her seedlings one by one. Young plants in February need moist soil, not wet soil. There's a real difference. Let the top of the soil dry out slightly between waterings. Make sure your containers have drainage holes and don't water on a schedule. Water based on what the plant actually needs, which you can check by sticking your finger in the soil. If it feels damp an inch down, skip the watering for another day or two. Here's another February mistake that ripples through the whole season: not hardening off indoor started plants before transplanting them outside. This one breaks my heart because I see it happen every spring, and it's so preventable. When you grow plants indoors, they're living in this protected, stable environment with no wind, no dramatic temperature swings, and no direct, intense sunlight. Then, if you just plop them straight into the garden one day, it's like throwing someone who's never left their house into a marathon. The shock is real, and it shows. I remember Rose telling me about her basil plants that looked gorgeous on her kitchen counter but completely wilted and got sunburned within hours of being planted outside. Plants need a gradual transition, usually over the course of 7 to 10 days. Start by putting them outside in a shaded, protected spot for just an hour or two, then bring them back in. Each day, increase their time outside and gradually expose them to more sun and wind. By the end of the hardening off period, they can stay out overnight and are ready for transplanting. Skip this process in February or early spring, and your plants will struggle with transplant shock that stunts their growth for weeks or even months. Fertilizing too early or too heavily is another February trap that has long-term consequences. I used to think that giving my plants extra fertilizer would help them grow faster and stronger, especially when they were young seedlings. Wrong. Young plants in February don't need much food at all. They're still developing their root systems and focusing on basic structure. If you hit them with strong fertilizer, especially high nitrogen formulas, you'll get lots of leafy green growth at the expense of strong roots. Plus, excess fertilizer salts can actually burn delicate roots and create nutrient imbalances that affect the plant all season. I watched Lucas nearly lose his entire crop of tomato seedlings because he was feeding them full-strength liquid fertilizer weekly, thinking he was helping. The plants got these dark green, almost purple leaves, the stems got brittle, and when it came time to transplant, the root systems were pathetic. Seedlings only need very diluted fertilizer, maybe a quarter-strength solution, once they've developed their first true leaves, and even then only every couple of weeks. Save the serious feeding for later in the season when plants are actively growing and producing flowers or fruit. Choosing the wrong containers for starting seeds is a February mistake that people don't realize matters until it's too late. I've seen folks use everything from egg cartons to yogurt containers to actual seed-starting trays, and not all containers are created equal. The main issues are depth and drainage. Shallow containers like egg cartons might seem cute and eco-friendly, but they don't give roots enough space to develop properly, which means your seedlings get root-bound really quickly. On the flip side, containers without drainage holes are a recipe for waterlogged soil and root rot. I learned this when I tried to reuse some plastic cups for seedlings without poking holes in the bottom. By the time I realized the water wasn't draining, it was too late, and fungus gnats had moved in along with some root rot issues. The best containers for February seed starting are at least 2 to 3 inches deep, have drainage holes, and are clean. You can reuse containers from previous years, but wash them with a diluted bleach solution first to kill any lingering diseases or pests. Those extra few minutes of preparation save you from problems that could plague your plants right through harvest time. Not providing enough light for indoor seedlings is probably the most common February mistake I see, and it creates those sad, stretchy plants that never quite catch up. Natural windowsill light in February is just not enough for most seedlings, even if you have a south-facing window. The days are still short, the sun angle is low, and clouds are common. Without adequate light, seedlings stretch toward whatever light source they can find, developing weak, spindly stems that can't support proper growth later. I used to think my seedlings were growing tall and therefore doing great, but my experienced gardening neighbour Ivy took one look and said, "Those are leggy, not healthy." She was right. The solution is supplemental lighting. You don't need fancy setups, though they help. Even basic shop lights with LED bulbs hung a few inches above your seedlings can make a world of difference. Keep the lights on for 14 to 16 hours a day and adjust the height as the plants grow so they stay close to the light source. Seedlings that get proper light in February develop stocky stems, good leaf development, and stay compact until it's time to move them outside. Those are the plants that thrive all season long. Planting bare root perennials or trees at the wrong time in February can set them back significantly. February can be tricky because in some regions it's fine to plant bare root stock, while in others the ground is still frozen or too wet to work. The mistake happens when people see bare root plants available at nurseries or online and assume it's automatically the right time to plant them. In regions where the ground is still frozen, you simply cannot plant. The roots need to make contact with workable soil to establish before spring growth kicks in. In areas where it's wet and muddy, planting is also a bad idea because you'll compact the soil, damage its structure, and create poor conditions for root growth. I knew a gardener who planted bare root roses in February during a warm spell, but then a hard freeze came back through. The newly planted roses didn't have time to establish any roots, and the freeze damage hurt them badly. They struggled all season, putting out weak growth and few blooms. The better approach is to wait until the soil is workable. It should be moist, but not muddy, and you should be able to dig without the soil clumping or sticking to your tools. If your bare root plants arrive before conditions are right, you can temporarily heal them into a pot of moist compost and keep them in a cool place until planting time. Ignoring pest prevention in February is another oversight with long-lasting effects. A lot of gardeners think pest management starts in summer when bugs are everywhere, but February is actually a critical time for prevention. Overwintering pests, diseases, and weed seeds are all lurking in your garden right now, waiting for warmer weather to explode into problems. This is the time to clean up any lingering plant debris from last season, which can harbour pests and diseases. It's also the time to inspect stored tools, pots, and equipment for hiding bugs or eggs. I once skipped this step and ended up bringing aphids into my house on some pots I'd stored in the garage over winter. Those aphids multiplied on my seedlings and created a nightmare that lasted for months. Similarly, if you're planning to reuse potting soil or compost, February is when you should be sterilizing it or checking it for pests. A little prevention now saves you from infestations that weaken plants and reduce yields all season. Check your stored bulbs and tubers too. If you spot any rot or pest damage, deal with it now before it spreads. Finally, one of the subtlest February mistakes is not planning crop rotation and companion planting before you start sowing seeds. I know it sounds like something you can figure out later, but once you've started seeds and they're growing, you're kind of committed to your plan. If you plant the same families of vegetables in the same spots year after year, you're setting yourself up for soil-borne diseases and nutrient depletion that will affect your plant's health all season. Tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants shouldn't go where you grew them last year. They need to rotate to a different bed. The same goes for brassicas, cucurbits, and other family groups. February is the perfect time to sit down with a notebook or garden planner and map out where everything will go based on what you grew last year. Think about companion planting too. Which plants support each other? Which ones repel pests? Which ones have different nutrient needs so they won't compete? When I finally started doing this planning in February instead of winging it in May, my garden's productivity jumped noticeably. Plants were healthier, pest problems decreased, and yields improved. It's one of those behind-the-scenes things that doesn't seem exciting but makes a tangible difference in how your plants perform from spring through fall. The thing about all these February mistakes is that they're so easy to make, especially when you're enthusiastic and eager to get growing. But each one creates a disadvantage that your plants have to overcome, and sometimes they just can't fully recover. A plant that starts weak tends to stay weak, attracts more pests, succumbs to diseases more easily, and produces less than its potential. On the other hand, when you take the time in February to do things right, starting seeds at the proper time, using good containers and lighting, preparing soil correctly, hardening off plants, and planning thoughtfully, you're setting up your entire season for success. Those plants develop strong root systems, sturdy stems, and resilient constitutions that help them handle whatever challenges come their way during the growing season. I've seen it in my own garden, year after year. The seasons where I'm patient and deliberate in February are always the seasons where I'm harvesting abundantly in August and September, while the years I rush or cut corners leave me disappointed and frustrated. Now let me share something else that's been on my mind lately: the mistake of using old or improperly stored seeds without testing their viability first. February is when most of us are pulling out those seed packets from last year, or maybe even from 2 or 3 years ago, getting ready to start our indoor planting. But here's what happens when you don't check whether those seeds are still good. You plant them, wait patiently for germination, and nothing comes up, or only a tiny percentage sprouts. By the time you realize the seeds were dead, you've lost valuable weeks of the growing season. I had this happen with some heirloom tomato seeds I'd been saving. They were expensive seeds from a variety I really loved, and I was so careful to keep a few from the best fruits. But I stored them in my garden shed where temperatures fluctuated wildly and moisture got in. When I planted them in February, my germination rate was maybe 10%. I ended up having to order new seeds and start over, which put me 3 weeks behind schedule. My tomato harvest that year was late and smaller than usual. The lesson? Do a germination test in early February. Take 10 seeds from each packet, place them on a damp paper towel, fold it over, put it in a plastic bag and keep it somewhere warm. Check after a week to see how many have sprouted. If less than half germinate, those seeds aren't worth your time. Get fresh ones. This simple test takes minutes but can save you from a seasonal setback. Another mistake I want to mention is neglecting to check and adjust your soil pH in February, especially if you're preparing beds for specific plants. Different plants have different pH preferences, and if your soil is too acidic or too alkaline, your plants will struggle to take up nutrients no matter how much fertilizer you add. Blueberries, for example, need acidic soil with a pH around 4.5 to 5.5. If you plant them in neutral or alkaline soil without amending it first, they'll show deficiency symptoms all season. Yellow leaves, poor growth, few berries. The same principle applies to vegetables. Most prefer slightly acidic to neutral soil, around 6 to 7 on the pH scale. If your soil is outside that range, you're fighting an uphill battle. I learned this when I tried growing beautiful hydrangeas one year. I wanted pink blooms, which require more alkaline soil, but my native soil was quite acidic. I didn't test or amend, just planted and hoped. The hydrangeas stayed stubbornly blue and never thrived. February is the ideal time to test your soil pH using an inexpensive kit from any garden centre. Based on the results, you can add lime to raise pH or sulfur to lower it, giving these amendments time to work into the soil before planting season really kicks off. Making these adjustments now means your plants will have access to the nutrients they need from day one. Let's talk about the mistake of overcrowding seedlings, which is something I see all the time and did myself for years before I understood the consequences. When you're sowing seeds in February, it's tempting to put multiple seeds in each cell or pot, thinking you'll thin them later. But what often happens is you either forget to thin or you feel bad about pulling out healthy seedlings and let them all grow. The result is cramped, competing plants that never develop properly. They fight for light, water and nutrients, their roots get tangled, and when you try to separate them for transplanting, you damage everyone involved. My friend Oliver made this mistake with his zucchini starts. He put 3 seeds per pot and let all 3 grow because they all looked so healthy. When he tried to separate them, the roots were so intertwined that he basically destroyed 2 plants trying to save all 3. The one surviving plant was shocked and took weeks to recover in the garden. It produced late and not abundantly. The better practice is to sow 1 or 2 seeds per cell, and if both germinate, thin to the strongest one by snipping the weaker seedling at soil level with scissors. Don't pull it out, as that disturbs the roots of the keeper. Yes, it feels wasteful, but giving each plant adequate space from the beginning sets it up for robust growth throughout the season. Temperature fluctuations are another February challenge that can damage plants for the long term. This is especially true for seedlings started indoors or tender perennials you're trying to protect. The mistake happens when people start seeds in locations that seem warm but experience dramatic temperature swings, like near a heating vent that blasts hot air sometimes and goes cold at night, or on top of a refrigerator that's warm from the motor but cold when the kitchen cools down at night. Plants are surprisingly sensitive to these swings, especially young seedlings. Consistent temperatures promote steady, healthy growth. Wild fluctuations stress plants, causing them to either grow too fast and get leggy or slow down and stall. I once started a whole tray of herbs on a sunny windowsill that seemed perfect during the day, but at night, cold drafts from the old window frame would drop temperatures significantly. Those herbs never grew vigorously. They were stunted and weak all season, even after I transplanted them. Now I use a heat mat under my seed trays to maintain consistent soil temperature, and I choose locations away from drafts and vents. It's made an enormous difference in the quality and vigor of my seedlings. Water quality is something most gardeners never think about, but it can absolutely affect your plants starting in February and continuing throughout their lives. If you're using tap water that's heavily chlorinated or has high mineral content, you might be inadvertently harming your seedlings and young plants. Chlorine can damage beneficial soil microbes and affect delicate roots, while hard water deposits can build up in soil over time, affecting pH and nutrient availability. I noticed this when my seedlings consistently developed brown leaf tips and slow growth, despite everything else being correct. I finally tested my tap water and discovered it was very hard with high chlorine levels. I started letting water sit out overnight before using it, which allows chlorine to evaporate, and I occasionally flushed the soil with rainwater to remove mineral buildup. The difference was remarkable. Healthier seedlings, better growth, stronger plants all season. If you have concerns about your water quality, collecting rainwater is an excellent solution, and February rains can fill up barrels quickly. Just make sure to use collected water within a reasonable time and keep containers covered to prevent mosquito breeding. Choosing the wrong seed starting mix is another error with lasting consequences. Not all potting soil is created equal, and garden soil is definitely not appropriate for starting seeds indoors. Garden soil is too heavy, compacts easily in containers, may contain weed seeds or diseases, and doesn't drain well enough for delicate seedlings. I've watched beginners fill their seed trays with soil from their garden and wonder why germination is poor and seedlings struggle. Proper seed starting mix is light, fluffy, sterile, and designed to provide the perfect balance of moisture retention and drainage. It's typically made from peat moss or coir, vermiculite, and perlite. Some gardeners try to save money by using regular potting soil instead of seed starting mix, but potting soil often contains fertilizers that are too strong for seeds and can actually inhibit germination. It may also contain larger particles that make it harder for tiny seedlings to push through. Invest in quality seed starting mix for your February sowings. It's not expensive and it makes a tremendous difference in germination rates and seedling health. Those strong seedlings will outperform weak ones all season long, making that small initial investment pay off many times over in your final harvest. The final mistake I want to address is something that's more psychological but equally important: having unrealistic expectations and not keeping good records. February is full of optimism and grand plans, which is wonderful, but it can also lead to disappointment if you're not realistic about what you can manage. Trying to start 50 different varieties of vegetables and flowers might sound exciting in February, but by May you're overwhelmed. Things aren't properly cared for, and plants suffer. Similarly, not keeping records of what you planted when, which varieties performed well, what problems you encountered, and what solutions worked means you're essentially starting from scratch every year. You can't learn from your mistakes or build on your successes if you don't remember what happened. I started keeping a simple garden journal years ago, and it's become one of my most valuable gardening tools. In February, I look back at previous year's notes to see what worked, what didn't, when I planted things, and how the weather affected everything. It helps me make smarter decisions and avoid repeating the same mistakes. It also helps me set realistic goals based on my actual available time, space, and abilities, rather than fantasy. This practice has transformed my gardening from a series of hopeful experiments into a steadily improving system where each year builds on the last. So, as we navigate through February together, remember that this month is really about foundation building. It's not the flashy part of gardening. There are no ripe tomatoes or blooming flowers to show off, but it's arguably the most important time for determining how your garden will perform. Take your time, resist the urge to rush spring, pay attention to those details that seem small but matter enormously, and trust that your patience now will be rewarded later. Every gardener makes mistakes, myself included, but the beautiful thing about gardening is that each season gives us another chance to learn and improve. Share your own February lessons in the comments. We're all learning together, and your experiences might help someone else avoid a mistake that would follow their plants all season. The collective wisdom of the gardening community is incredible, and I love hearing about your trials, triumphs, and everything in between. Until next time, keep growing, keep learning, and happy gardening from all of us here at Botanic Haven.